E3 is pretty much a video game fan's Christmas. Every E3, you get all sorts of crazy stuff going on. You get new game announcements, new game reveals, new system reveals. There's always a lot of information going on with E3. It's always a great time if you're a fan of video games because you're learning about upcoming stuff. You're getting new exclusive stuff revealed at these events, and it's just a great time if you're a fan of video games. But over the past few years, E3 has been kind of losing its luster a little bit. There's a myriad of reasons for that, which we'll talk about in this video, but it seems like every year E3 becomes less and less impactful in the world of video games. Now with E3 2019, two major companies will not be doing press events at this event. Both Sony and EA have said that they're not going to be at E3 2019 doing a traditional press event. So a lot of people are signaling that this could be the end of E3. This could be the end of E3 as we know it, and maybe it's time to pull the plug on E3. So that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about in this video. I want to go over both the history of E3, the present of E3, and the future of E3 to see if we actually even need E3 anymore. So sit back, relax, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and let's talk about the current state of E3.
Hey, RGT 85. Hey, Sean.
Oh my God, it's Stevie Richards! So you can't talk about the present and the future without acknowledging the past of E3, because E3 has been around for quite a while now. It's been around since 1995, and it was originally done to sort of showcase video games. Before that, you had to do things like Consumer Electronics Show in order to show off your video games. But E3 became a dedicated video game event, and like I said, in 1995 we had the first year of the event, and it pretty much set the pace and the tone for what to expect from future E3s. Of course, we got exclusives, we got big announcements, we got reveals, new looks at upcoming systems. E3 1995 was definitely infamous though for the Sony and Sega head-to-head warfare. Of course, Sony was releasing the PlayStation, came out on stage and said that it was going to be $299 and pretty much dropped a mic on everything. Of course, Sega released the Sega Saturn during E3 1995, pretty much showing that you never knew what to expect at E3. What was going to happen? You didn't know, because Sega released a freaking console, which of course was one of the downfalls of the Sega Saturn during E3 1995. Now, aside from 2 years in 1997 and 1998, which the event was held in Atlanta, Georgia, and 1 year in 2007, which was held in Santa Monica, it's always been held in LA at the LA Convention Center. Now, the biggest E3 was back in 2005, which set an attendance record of 70,000 people, which honestly, that's a lot of damn people. I can't imagine 70,000 people wandering around a show floor all together at the same time, looking at all the upcoming video games. And really, during this time frame, this was before the accessibility that the internet offered. So most of these announcements and revealed were done in magazines. You had magazines like EGM, GamePro, Nintendo Power, and other magazines were the only ways to get inside access and first looks at these events to see the latest and greatest games and systems. And a lot of these companies would have people go to these events and take these pictures, get backroom interviews and things like that so that you could learn more about these games. It really started to make video game publications an important thing because it was the main way to get information on these upcoming new game reveals and systems that were done at E3. DVDs started appearing in 2004 for these events, and I remember getting one at GameStop, and it would allow you to see all the press conferences, all the trailers, all the reveals, and more. And then of course, as time went on, you had big websites that were industry icons like GameSpot and IGN, which were also becoming very crucial at this time. And the growth of the internet and all access everywhere started to sort of damage the mystique of E3, I feel. You had so many different people and so many different publications showing up at this event. It wasn't like a handful of magazines. Now with the rise of the internet, you started to have all these different websites covering the event, and it started to lose some of its mystique, I feel, because of that. As far as the E3 event itself is concerned, it's undergone some changes as well. Sometimes allowing fans access and sometimes just limiting it to the press. The press-only events didn't really go over very well though, so this idea was dropped in order to allow fans access to the event as well, because a lot of people would like to travel to these events and learn about these video games, and it was good ticket sales for E3. But honestly, as with a lot of things, E3 wasn't really designed to be future-proof. With the rise of high-speed internet and independent people in the gaming industry, E3 unfortunately started to lose some of its luster. Companies like Nintendo were starting to do their own things like Nintendo Directs, which would often highlight big announcements. Things really changed in 2013 though, when Nintendo decided to not do any stage show at E3, instead doing a pre-taped Nintendo Direct instead. People were curious to see how this would play out for Nintendo, but the result was less dead air, less stupid jokes, and honestly, a tighter presentation. Nintendo since then has done pre-taped events for the most part, and they always seem to nail it. The change of philosophy, I think, opened a lot of people's eyes towards E3 in general, and started to give this notion that maybe these huge on-stage events just weren't necessary anymore. Since then, things like Twitter, Facebook, and press release emails have started replacing these massive events. Companies are starting to spend less with E3, and a lot of the big surprises are being leaked and known before the events even happen. Now less and less focus seems to be put onto E3, and what was once the big premier event in gaming seems to be getting less and less important in the grand scheme of the video game industry. And of course, we learned that Sony was not going to be doing a press conference at E3 2019, pretty much not even showing up for the event. And that started to trigger a lot of things in people's minds. There was definitely two sort of mindsets when looking at this. Was it a thing about Sony? Was Sony just not confident in what they had to show with the PS4? Obviously, maybe they're not ready to show off the PS5. Or was it a sign of E3 pretty much dying? And now, of course, yesterday, EA announced that they will not be doing a press conference at the event. Now, granted, EA's press conferences have been very mediocre to absolutely horrible in the past few years. I mean, let's not remember E3 2018, which was just abysmal for EA. But honestly, a major company is not doing a press conference at E3 2019. Once again, they're doing their own sort of thing. So now with no press conference from Sony, no press conference from EA at E3 2019, a lot of people are signaling that this could be the end of E3 as we know it. And honestly, I don't think E3 needs to go away completely. A lot of people are saying that E3 just isn't needed anymore because of things like Twitter, because of the rise of social media and the internet in general. You don't really need an event like E3. A lot of these companies can reach to their consumers by using things like social media, and of course then once you send out a press release, once you do something on social media, you have people talking about it, from major websites to YouTubers. Pretty much everyone in the gaming sphere is talking about what you just announced via social media and Twitter and all of those different sorts of things. But I still think E3 is a necessity. I just think they need to sort of change the model of it. I think one of the major problems is that it's in LA every year. I really think they need to do maybe one on the West Coast and one on the East Coast, maybe one in the Midwest. You know, switch it up a little bit. Obviously, LA is a nightmare when it comes to traffic. I've never been to E3 myself personally, but I know Jason from Enthusiast Gaming went last year, and he just had all these horror stories about traffic and all this congestion. Trying to get to the event was an absolute nightmare, even though he was like 2 blocks away, staying at a hotel there. It just doesn't seem like a good place for people to commute in and out of. So I think by switching it up, by doing it, you know, maybe on the West Coast one year, maybe doing it on the East Coast one year, doing it in the Midwest one year, I think you're opening it up to a lot more people. Obviously, these people are flying into this event. Yes, there are a lot of businesses, a lot of, you know, companies are based out of LA, but really, if you have to fly to this event and take time off for this event, it doesn't really seem like that big of a deal to sort of shift the area that it's in. But I really feel like the main thing that E3 needs to do in order to stay relevant is downsize, because these events are just too big. There's too much money put into them, and the residuals don't necessarily come back. You could put out a press release in an email or a press release out on Twitter and get the same sort of feedback that you would at an E3 event. And then, of course, everyone else is covering this event. Everyone else is covering your news and your information. So do you really need this huge, massive event anymore in order to do this? You really don't from a financial standpoint. I do like E3 though. I enjoy E3 time. I enjoy talking about E3. And one important thing that E3 always does is it brings mainstream media's eyes onto the world of video games. A lot of major news websites and news channels that normally don't talk about video games will talk about video games during E3 time. Everyone's eyes are on the video game industry during E3. So I think completely getting rid of it would sort of harm the video game industry as a whole, because you're trying to, you know, incorporate video games as a something for everyone sort of thing. Just like movies, just like music, just like television. It is another form of entertainment that unfortunately still has sort of a kiddie stigma attached to it just because of how it was initially brought up. I think video games are very important as an entertainment medium. So by having mainstream media cover video games during E3 time is still a very important thing, and I think it's a very important thing for the video game industry. But honestly, as far as these huge, massive E3 presentations are concerned, I think this year will be one of the last few years that you see this sort of thing. I think a lot of companies are realizing you don't have to put all this money and time and effort into doing something at E3 when you have things like social media, you have the internet available at your fingertips, which everyone has on their computer or on their phone nowadays. The flow of information has definitely changed since the inception of E3 1995. and I think you're starting to see the results of that. I honestly feel like E3 just needs to become a smaller event, maybe travel around a little bit. It's still important, it's still impactful, because people who don't necessarily pay attention to video games are forced to pay attention to video games because of all these mainstream websites and mainstream media covering the event. But as a whole, E3 definitely needs to change in order to stay alive. But will they be willing to? I don't know. A lot of these companies, they're not willing to change things. It seems like they would rather go under, so it's going to be a very few interesting years for E3 coming up in the future. But let me know in the comments section down below what you think about this. Do you think E3 is on its way out? Do you think that there's a way to sort of resurrect it, make it an important event anymore? Or do you see the event just sort of diminishing over time? And as always, thank you for checking out this video. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Check out other videos on the channel, and as always, I will catch you guys on the next video. Later.